Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kosuke. I'm a VFX artist and welcome to Master Film Study. It's a challenge to replicate a scene from a movie completely in digital. And you are here with me observing the challenge and the struggles that I had, and also I can share the tips and tricks that I learned along the way. So this is the third challenge and I'm trying to change up the format. It's more like a YouTuber style rather than like time lapse and then just rambling over it. And this is my first time showing my face, so hello everyone. Also, I wanted to point out that this is not a tutorial. This is more of like a breakdown. I'm talking about the key points, the concepts or tips that I wanted to mention about. Personally, I don't know how to create a perfect tutorial video. So hopefully in the future, if I figure out the way to explain things very concisely and nicely, maybe I can do it. But enough of talking, so let's get into it. Analytics. The movie Her is an American sci-fi movie released in 2013. It's about a man falling in love with AI device just like Siri or Alexa. It's very insightful, but very melancholic and sad at the same time. Director is Spike Jonze. He's a director slash producer slash actor. Interestingly enough, he also appears as an actor in Wolf of Wall Street too.
If you sell $10,000 worth of this stock, I will personally give you a for free.
Cinematographer is Hoyt van Hoytema. His works include Interstellar, Dunkirk, Ad Astra, and Tenet. Spike Jonze and Hoyt van Hoytema also shot a commercial film for Kenzo World. You can see the similar taste of shallow tips of field and color correction on this film too. I like this film a lot that I ended up using it as a roto assignment when I was a student in film school. And I hated roto ever since. They use multiple cameras and lenses combined. It was shot by Alexa M, Alexa Studio, and Canon EOS C300. The lenses used in this film was Canon lenses, Cooke lenses, and Zeiss lenses. About this shot. This is when the protagonist Theodore was signing the divorce paper with his ex-wife. Meanwhile, she's signing the paper, he was having his flashback about the goofy, good old days with his ex-wife. And this shot appears in one of his flashbacks. What I can say about this shot, it's very confusing and very strange. The guideline in this shot are all over the place. It's going up and down. And also window line of the building in behind. It's very all over the place. And also it was very hard to determine the proper perspective because this is when the protagonist was falling in love with AI device and then divorcing his human wife. That's really strange enough. At least personally, that's how I see this shot.
Let me know if I can get you guys anything.
Thank you.
Layout and modeling. As usual, I use free software called FSpy to determine focal length as well as the perspective of the shot. FSpy is a software computes the approximate focal length, orientation, and position of the camera in 3D space based on user-defined control points in still images. So basically, all you need to do is just find the perspective line, align few lines, and FSpy does the work for you. In this shot, like I mentioned before, the perspective line was very confusing. Basically, they're standing on the ramp of highway. So I couldn't actually use the line of the highway because it's not perpendicular to the horizontal line. So it was very hard to determine which one is the right one. So ended up believing some of these lines from the building is the correct one. Something to take note is for Blender, the axes are Z up. You have to set the vertical line to be the Z axis. Once you set up the guidelines, you can import FSpy file directly into Blender. That brings you the camera as well as the background image already set up. All you need to do from now on is just start aligning all the objects in the scene perfectly, or at least as much as you can. One thing I found it helpful though is try to incorporate geometry nodes as much as I can. I'm using Blender 3.0 that comes with the latest geometry node update. I'm pretty new to geometry node. In Blender 3.0 they changed the architecture of geometry nodes, so basically it's more simple, but whatever you learn for Blender up until Blender 2.9 is completely changed. But luckily, for something super simple, was not that hard to learn. In this scene, I made the guardrail with geometry nodes. I made the guardrail based on the curve, so I can align that super easily. And if I need to shift some of the elements with the guardrail, I can easily modify that. It's nothing complex, it's super simple setup. But one thing that I wanted to mention is just like a normal curve tool, at first I was using the mesh and then convert it into the curve with mesh to curve node, and then use that profile to shape the guardrail. However, I realized if I convert the shape into the curve and then feed into the geometry node, that kind of screw up the normal. I shouldn't use the mesh to convert to curve, but I should have used curve from the very beginning. So here I had the square shape geometry, but I should have used the curve to make the square shape. And then feed that to geometry node. That will fix the normal problem. If I need to bevel a little bit, so far geometry node doesn't have any bevel tool, so you needed to create some points directly to the curve path. I hope it will be fixed in the future. The guardrail has poles, probably every 1 meter or something, and determine where the pole is supposed to be by using the point of the curve. And you can set the vector to length so that no matter how long or no matter how much you change the length of the guardrail, the lengths between each poles are always the same. That was very handy, especially in this phase as you are aligning the guardrail according to the image. Also, some parts like sidewalk, you have to select a lot of points to align perfectly. That causes a little bit of bump, especially if you have a lot of subdivision. So I ended up also using geometry node for that. Same concept for guardrail. I was just using the curve to shape up the sidewalk, so that if I feel like maybe this highway is supposed to be longer than I expected, then I can just change the length of the curve, and then the sidewalk comes along with it. So that was pretty handy. For the characters in front of the camera, which is the protagonist Theodore and his ex-wife, thankfully their faces are hidden by this, how do you call this, construction cone. I didn't really care about the look of their face or whatsoever. So just like before, I used the free software called Make Human. In this software, you can quickly create a character. You can change gender, profile. You can change the height. It comes with a few pattern of clothes. For this one, since the character is so simple, I didn't even need to go into details. I just selected the default characters, and then so it comes with rigged version. It was pretty handy to post them accordingly. I'm very keen to jump onto more sophisticated software though, in case I need of more making detailed characters. So I heard human generator for Blender, it's pretty nice. Also for Unreal Engine, there's MetaHuman. I don't think you can use the MetaHuman for other software yet. But yeah, let me know if you know any software that enables you to create characters. I'm very curious about learning them. Texturing and lighting. I'm a huge fan of Blender's procedural shading system. I like creating things with noise or wave textures, but also there is Quixel Megaskin. You can use them for free. It comes with PBR texture. It looks really realistic already. And also I use textures.com texture for the buildings. And there are a few tips that I use for this one. For example, if you see the sidewalk, the edge of the sidewalk of this image, this is highway, so the edge of the sidewalk is chipped a little bit. To achieve that, basically I selected the area by creating the new image texture. It's a black image, just texture painted. Basically selected the area that I want to create the chipping, mix with the default noise pattern and multiply it, and that feeds to the bump, and then you invert the bump. So basically wherever the edge that I selected and multiplied by the noise pattern, it's gonna be a little bit, chipped towards it. Also, there are a few asphalt patching on this highway ramp that I was thinking about sculpting it, but like it's maybe too much. So what I ended up was like same thing as sidewalk. I created a new image texture and assign it UV unwrap, and I started painting where the asphalt patching is. Just feed that straight to the bump. Therefore, wherever the white part of the texture will be erupted, so it kind of looks like patching of the asphalt. I was not 100% convinced by the look, but it was the cheapest solution. I ended up color correcting at the end of it. I believe this can be very useful for some cases. I used the same image texture to the new shader, blend two shaders into one, use the texture map as a shader mask, because I believe this patching has more specular and smoother surface than the asphalt, and a little bit brighter color, so it was very handy. For the concrete pattern, I was too lazy to find a concrete texture or weathering texture from textures.com, so I just used noise. I just used noise, made it super long, and map it vertically so that you can get kind of like the weathering pattern. I use it for sidewalk and the screen right building. Also, wave texture is very useful to create or to simulate a vertical pattern of the asphalt for the main ramp. And also the yellow line on the screen left side was also created by the wavelength texture. The only caveat was you have to bend it along with the curve. So the technique was I had two vectors feeding into this line. One vector is a little bit offset to the left side, and then I blend two vectors with gradient texture. So basically the position of the straight line starts to curve into the new vector because of the gradient texture. And if I change the value of the gradient texture so as the line, the curvature of the line also changes. This is a hacking way. I'm pretty much sure there is another way to do this. But you know, whatever that gets job done. For the lighting, it's very obvious, but the more light source you have, the harder to determine where exactly those light sources are. In this example, I believe the light source was all these highway lights, but since we don't know how far they are, there are some invisible lights behind the camera. There are gaffers putting more artificial lights onto the character, so it was very hard to determine. That was a mess. Also, what I learned was I was using spotlight at first. I just couldn't mimic the highway light. I ended up creating or faking highway light, having the point light wrap it around the cover. That cover is like fully metallic, which obviously increased the lighting cost. So I don't think that's the smartest way. I just couldn't get along with Blender's spotlight system. One thing though is to look out for the shape of the shadow. Look how sharp the shadow of these characters are. So this very harsh shadow only occurs when you have a super bright light source, or in this case, by setting the point light's radius to be extremely small, that kind of shape up this sharp edge line of the shadow. So that was one thing that I learned from here. I believe same thing goes for even if you are using sunlight as well. I think you can set the disk size of sun, and if you have it like 30 degrees or like the bigger size of the sun, your shadow will be diffused. So sharper shadow, smaller light source. Compositing. My go-to software for compositing is Nuke, just because I'm used to it. This is where the magic happens to me, because the lighting from this scene was a little bit off, well, actually very off from the actual image. So I needed to tweak the color and value of each lighting. I needed to balance it off in 2D by basically just changing the value and color onto each element. So this is just the pure patience. Yeah, you just have to do it with the help of CryptoMat. You can also use IDMat and just masking out, keying, whatever the method you can find. Just tackle with one by one. I started from the high rise in background. And the trick here is to nail the value, not the color. Color is somewhat forgiving as long as your value is correct. I was very careful with the black level and white level because all the great painters, or like if you're learning art, you start from value because that's so powerful. By just putting the right value, you can really create the depth that I would say consists 70% of the image. The reason I like about Nuke when it comes to matching the color is because Nuke shows you the true color. It's 32-bit by default linearized. You can gamma up and down, exposure up and down with the slider in the viewport, where in other software perhaps not having, even Photoshop doesn't have. And also in Nuke, you can check each channel by just press RGB key on your keyboard, and also if you put Y, that shows the grayscale. So that's really handy. Like you can just go check each color, each value in the viewport on the fly. I ended up color correcting every single element in the scene to balance it up to the reference, but that plays a huge role. You can see the difference from beginning to the end. So that's the color matching part. After that, I added defocus as well as the blooming effect of the lights. I used Z defocus for the defocusing effect. For the blooming, I used volume rate. I changed each blooming for each light. Since I was not happy with how the character's clothes are, I ended up painting in Photoshop, just basically shaping up, added more wrinkles, and bringing back to Nuke. And on top of that, I added a little bit of final touch, including chromatic aberration and grain, and that's the end of it. So that is pretty much how I've done it. I know it has been a pretty quick. So basically, I've done 90% of work in Blender and then bringing back to 2D software to balance it out to look. So there you go, that was it. And let me know about this format. Would you prefer the time-lapse method or more like this shorter method? Please let me know in the comment. And also please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That really helps me. So thank you so much and see you in the next video.